Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that you're here. Hello, welcome to the Earth Angel Experience podcast. I'm Daisy, and I'm so looking forward and so excited for today. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, hello, Lady Dice. How are you, Jackie? So great that you're here, my love. I'm waiting to see if we have our special guest on today. I don't see him in yet. And I don't see Marge here. Hello, Emmanuel. Thank you for joining. Hi, Danny. Thank you for joining. I'm so excited for today. Oh, that's so great to hear. Hi, Karen. Thank you for joining. I'm so excited, guys, for today's podcast. I'm like literally so happy. Let's see if Marge has joined. This is going to be a really, really fun podcast here. Let me see if I text Marge. Where is she? She's probably getting ready. She was sending me pictures of her getting ready. It was super cool. I hope everyone's having a great time. This is, again, the Earth Angel Experience podcast is really a podcast to share and shed light into the world. A lot of us are really going through awakening now. And people are just really curious and wondering about the next steps or the phases or what other people are doing when they feel this calling, this inner calling within themselves. And so I'm truly honored to be able to bring forward people that are either working either as mediums or psychics or working in any form of spirituality that is just really unique to them and that really helped them on their journey to their path. To self-awareness and to their higher self. And so allowing these people to come on and speak to you all is really just an honor. And it's a great learning experience for everyone. And I hope you guys really enjoy that. Let's see if Marge is in. I don't see you, Marge. Okay. It's supposed to be here. You know how it is getting ready. So yeah, so remember, if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment. If there's any topics that you want us to talk about or anything you want to have re-elaborated or just spoken more in depth, you can let us know. The podcast is an hour long, so I know there's just so many questions we can ask, but definitely feel free to DM me afterwards, or you can DM Marge if there's anything specific you want to know about. But Marge is just like an amazing person, and it's just interesting how we met, and just getting to know her at a deeper level is just beautiful. Again, I don't see her on. Let me see if I text her. So we'll wait for her to finish gluing on her eyelashes. How is everyone? So where's everyone contacting me from? Because I believe some of you are in Italy. Emmanuel, you're still there, right, my love? I hope you're well. I miss you. I can't wait to see you in the shop. There might be a lag too. So I know Instagram has like this weird like lag. So sometimes it seems like we're talking over each other, like when I'm interviewing, but that's because it's just like a little bit of a delay. You're good. That's so good to hear. I can't wait to see you. Yeah, after my birthday. My birthday is on the 2nd, so I'm so excited. So I'll be seeing you that week, hopefully. Or whenever you're ready to come in to chat. That's great. Okay, let's see, Marge. Where's Marge? So not here. Hi, Claudie. Thanks for joining, my love. How are you? So we're still waiting on Marge. I just want to thank everyone again for being patient and for being here with me. Again, if anyone has any questions or just anything you want us to elaborate on. Oh, there she goes. Okay, let me just ask her to join in. The queen must have everyone wait, I suppose. Okay, Marge, I invited you. You should have the invite, and then you can just click on that. Oh, you're here? I see you joined, but I don't see your screen.
Hello.
Oh my gosh,
How are
darling. What?
Thank you.
Hello. How are you? You are gorge. Oh my
How's it going?
gosh, you look beautiful. Absolutely stunning. I love you. So before I get into you and your beautiness and your eyelashes and the glue situation, I just want to thank everyone for being on the podcast, the Earth Angel Experience podcast. This is a podcast where I just really felt drawn and really guided to share the messages that are now going on in the world. I work as an energy healer, as a light worker, as a medium, and all of these loaded words. But at the end of the day, it's really about the love that we have within ourselves and wanting to share that love with others so that we can help others on their paths, whether it is that they're just finally now discovering that there might be something more out there, or that if they were grown up in certain religious beliefs and that kind of spooked them a little bit, and now they're not sure as to where to head because they're confused by all the information that's out there. So this podcast is really just to allow everyone to feel an acceptance, feel belonged, to allow them to start opening up and expanding themselves to what's beyond the five senses, because everyone is a spiritual being, everyone is a light being. It's really just a matter of how we cultivate that, how we develop that, and how we expand that and express that to the world. And of course, working on ourselves, working on our interior self is really what's going to help us be able to help others ultimately, and ultimately help the ascension of the planet one person at a time. So with that being said, I really want to welcome and introduce the lovely Marge Aaron Johnson.
So
my dear, welcome.
Super excited for our conversation.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to put my volume up. Yay, I know. This is amazing. So for those of you who don't know, and I'll have you definitely explain in depth what you do, who you are, and all that good stuff. But Marge, I actually met James first. So we'll get into the story of how I met you in a little bit. But okay, so Marge, you're a preacher, activist, drag queen, but you're also a medium. This is how I met you. I met you during our mediumship, our medium mentorship program with Kay. So guys, if you saw the last episode, you've met Kay already. She's amazing. So that's where I met James, and that's where James told me about his whole experience, what he does, who he is, and it's just so amazing, so happy. But yeah, so Marge, you have a Master of Divinity, a degree. You're an advocate for social justice work on behalf of queer and trans community. You're an editor of a book I want us to talk about, Beyond Worship. I'm so excited to hear more about that. And of course, you're a digital minister in Washington Heights. This is amazing, at the Fort Washington Collegiate Church. This is like amazing. So can you just like walk us through this beautiful journey and this path of yours?
I went to seminary after I actually have a degree in forensic anthropology, and I decided that I needed to do something that was more meaningful to the world, because the field is very oversaturated with people who are looking to be anthropologists and forensic scientists. So I had the call to go to seminary when I was a teenager, and so I went to Union Theological Seminary in New York City. And, you know, I'm on the path to become ordained in the United Church of Christ, which is a so-called progressive Christian denomination. Yeah. And I would just say,
that's amazing.
As far as mediumship goes, I like to say that even before I was a Christian, before I believed in God, I believed in the presence of spirit among us, because that was my experience, right? Waking up in the middle of the night and being like, why is there someone in my room? And who is that?
And tell us about that. So at what age was this happening? At what age did you felt that strong connection to spirit, or that you remember your first spiritual encounter, and what was it? If you don't mind talking to us about what it was.
And so, one of the things that I distinctly remember is when my cat died, and I would go to sleep at night, and I would see the cat the tail of the cat was like a very fluffy tail, and I would see it moving through the hallway, and I was like, what is that? Like, that looks like the cat. You know? And so it was just like very confusing for me as like, I don't know how old I was, maybe like five, 6 or 7. And I had also I was in a bedroom that was part of an older part of my family home. And so once I started having these experiences, my family actually moved me into the newer part of the home, where we had an addition. So the premise was that I wouldn't experience anything, but I still did. Um, but not really to the extent that I did
Wow.
before.
That's amazing. And so when obviously you were too young to like fully understand that, what you were probably receiving was mediumistic messages or images through the clairs and all that. But at what point, I guess, did the religion come into your life, and did you when you went into religion, did your visions and information from the other side start coming through more, or was it,
No, it
how
was
did this
actually very
happen
much
for
the
you,
opposite.
like the meshing and the blending of the two?
So I would say, like, I grew up going to church.
Wow.
My family went to this church in my hometown. I was a 5th-generation member in the church. And, I went to the church with my mom and my grandmother and my sister and my aunt. Like, we were all, and my cousins, like, we were all members of this church. And, like, what I had found was that the church really wasn't a place where I could explore that. It was just sort of like, oh, well, like, we don't really talk about that here. And I found that that's true for, like, a lot of Christianity, is that there's not really a concern, and especially in, like, I would say, like, moderate and progressive Christian spaces, there's not really a concern with the afterlife. It's just sort of like, more of a concern with, like, the here and now, which I think absolutely has its benefits, right? And so there was this yearning that I had for more. Like, I need to understand more and more of my experience. Because my family is like, they're also mediums. They're just not developed. And so, like, my grandmother was very much a medium, and she was also a psychic, and she used to make predictions, and she passed away about 1.5 years ago. But she was really affirming in my journey in, I guess I would say, in spiritualism and, in more like psychic medium spaces, in addition to church. It was sort of like two things for us that were like, you go to church and then you're also a medium. And it's just like, it wasn't a conflict for us. It was just the way that we experienced life.
Right. And so that's so beautiful that you had the support of your family, and that because they themselves were also mediums. So at what point in your, I guess, in your spiritual growth, did you really feel like a pull towards the mediumship, or pull to even go more into deeper, with the religion, with the aspects of Christianity and the religious side? And also, can you explain to us your idea or interpretation of the difference between spiritualism and religion? Because there's a lot of people that I feel that, especially clients of mine, that come and they come into my space. I'm an energy worker. I also work with crystals, and they tell me, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. They have this deep fear that they shouldn't either be receiving healing. They know that I'm able to communicate with the angels and with guides. They want to have readings, but they have this deep fear. So, and I understand, because, sometimes, people can take the Bible and take it like these absolute rules that if you don't go by, or you're not adhering to, that you're going to go to hell, or you're going to be a sinner, and that there's all these like horrible words that are being said. I personally think that it's more like a metaphor. I really take like the Bible, like a lot of the things that are going on, are metaphorically speaking, but needless to say, what's your opinion about that, about those people who might be afraid of turning away from the religion, or they want to turn away from their religion to reach spirituality,
Yeah,
but they don't know what it is?
when it
Can
comes
you
down to it,
explain
the
the
church is like
difference?
constantly full of shit in so many ways, and like this is just another example of like how the church is full of shit, right? So we can open the Bible and we can find different examples of like where it says, oh, like condemn like psychic and like fortune telling and mediums and like wizards and like whatever else. And then there are also examples where like those things are portrayed positively. And so especially in, I would say, 1 Samuel 28 is probably one of the bigger
Right.
ones, because it tells the story of the medium of Endor, and King Saul going to find advice from, God or from whoever else after his prophets and his dream interpreters were unable to contact God. And so it was during a time when he had actually outlawed mediums and he went to seek the advice of one. And so it does show, like, the story is very interesting in that it shows the hypocrisy, I think.
Right. And even to that extent, like one story that it's just stuck in my mind is the story of Mary when she was visited by the Archangel Gabriel. I mean, wouldn't that mean that obviously she was a medium or she was a psychic, she was receiving information, she had a visitation, and then later on Joseph had the visitation. So it's stuff like that in the Bible where they're almost like condemning or saying that mediumship might be bad, or it's not good, or it's not kosher to connect with the dead. Yet there are people that are beyond human form that were coming to communicate to those people. So I completely agree and see your point there. Are there any other examples that you think are super prominent to the discussion between just kind of removing the stigma away from mediumship, or those of us who are more connected, either psychically or just spiritually, but also might even believe in some aspects of the Bible? Like for myself, I really believe I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in lots of different ideas, lots of different spiritual aspects to spiritual cultures, the way that they believe, Buddhism, Hinduism. There's so many things. I work with the chakra system, so it's just beautiful how the way that I look at it is about the message. It's about how are we empowering our internal dialogue, ourselves, so that we can have that light within us, so that we can be connected to source, right? So what do
I
you
think
say about
one
that?
really
What are
cool
your
example in the
opinions?
Bible, and especially one that could also speak to like inner faith relations, is the story of the Magi. And so the Magi are like not only like dream interpreters and prophets, they're also astrologers, right? They can look up at the sky and they can see this star, and be able to interpret the meaning of the star. And so this star is written as if like anyone can see the star, right? If you're a sighted person, then you can look up into the sky and you can see the star, but they're the ones who are able to interpret what the star means. And so I would say that. And then another prominent example that I would give is casting lots. And so casting lots is a little bit like ambiguous, like what exactly is casting lots? And I would say it's like the equivalent of like rolling dice, or like casting like bones or something like that, right? And so the way in which they replace Judas Iscariot, who is the disciple who betrayed Jesus, right, is by casting lots. They decide, and it's in Acts 1, they use a casting lots of divination, right? So they choose the new 12th disciple, who's Matthias, by using divination, which I think is really fascinating and something that is very overlooked.
Right. It's just amazing because there's so much almost contradictions, as we were just saying earlier, between lots of things that are written in the Bible, to, you know, psychic development or mediumship development. So I just want to kind of go a little bit backwards a little bit, and then how did this mediumistic, I guess, awakening happen for you? So when you were a child, you were receiving, you have family members that are mediums as well. How did this cultivate and develop, you know, the sense of who you are today? What have you done on your journey, or when did you realize, wow, I actually am me, I get it now? At what
Probably
point
like
did that
once I
happen?
started studying with Kay Reynolds, right? Like, because I had always had like different
Oh, great.
experiences with spirit, or with spirits, but I don't, like, I never really tried to communicate with them, right? Or like do readings with them. And so, like after I had finished seminary, it was like actually like that summer after I finished seminary, I was like looking to continue learning, right? I wanted to continue learning, and so I decided that I wanted to explore this facet of my life that has just sort of been sitting there for a period of time, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, I've done a year and a half with Kay in
That's
the mentorship,
awesome.
and I think it's totally worth it if you're someone who's interested in developing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, Kay is just, I had Kay on my podcast the last session, and she's just like an amazing person because you can tell she's just the type of person that has been through it all, you know, the ups, the downs, the doubts, the greatness, and she's just so humble about it, and she just really, really just wants, like she says, there was something she said like really early on in the course where she mentions that us being there, we already have it. It's more about like us believing and trusting in ourselves and letting it all go so that we believe it in ourselves and we have that deeper connection to spirit. And I just thought that was like really nice. I thought that was like a really nice like segue into it. But I did want to talk about like when we first met, because I do feel like the second that there was a group, we had a group of what, 20, 24 um, mediums that were in the course with Kay. There was a few people who I gravitated to, and it was you. You were definitely one of them. And it's just interesting because I feel like the more that we actually read for each other, and the more that we connect with spirits for one another, I feel like there's also a realization of how much similarities there are between you and me. Do you want to talk about the first time that we
Oh
met
gosh,
and
which
like
time?
that amazing reading?
Oh,
I know
okay,
we've read
yeah.
for each other so
So
many
I
times.
thought
The
it
one
was
with the
really
picnic that
interesting.
we were
So
talking
Kay was
about.
doing a platform demonstration in mediumship, which is when you're like in front of a group of people and you have a spirit communicator and you have to narrow down, you know, who the spirit communicator is connected to. And so Kay was giving this like really interesting information about like family picnics under a tree, a folding table, folding chairs, and things like that. And I was like, oh, like that's my family, like that's totally my family. And so like Kay had narrowed it down, and it was me and Daisy, and I was like, this has got to be an example of like when a spirit comes through and they sort of give like parallel information to someone else. So that's what I was thinking. I think some people call that piggybacking. I don't like that term.
Right.
I think it's kind of gross sounding, but that's basically what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's so funny because I do remember that reading. I thought it was amazing, but I also really remembered, I really felt a deep connection when I actually read for you. And I remember it was bringing forward like a loved one of yours. But it was a friend, I think, that I had brought through. If I remember, we had so many readings. But what I remember was you being on stage, and it was just like I told you. I said, I see lights on you. This is before you told me about the whole that you were a drag queen, and this is what you did. You worked for the church. You actually did sermons. You were a preacher. All this stuff. And I literally said, I don't know, I just see you on the stage with bright lights, and I see that you're such a bright light and that you have this loving message for the world. But I also feel like you just need to do it and not worry about anyone or anything. And that's when you told me about yourself and the drag. And I really felt that deep connection with you. I just felt like it just solidified what I had already initially felt when I met you. So I'm just so glad that, again, that you're here and that, you know, we're partners. Like, we're doing a lot of work together now, and I just think that it's so fun and interesting. So thank you again for all that. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. So I want to go into a little bit. I don't know. Did you? So what is your? Can you break down what again for us the difference between your opinion on religion versus spirituality for those of us who are confused and may not really know the difference, or if they are truly into the religion but they're trying to get away from it?
So
How would you describe
spiritualism as
spiritualism to
something
you?
that's a bit more transcendent of religious traditions and is included in many religious traditions and also just like spiritual practices, right? So religion, I think, is more along the lines of like a tradition that you have, right? And there's usually a concern when it comes to religion. So in Christianity, the main concern, I would say, is salvation. And there's no one definition of salvation. And there are a lot of white evangelical types who will be like, salvation means you go to heaven and da-da-da-da. And for me, salvation is just like being saved from like doing nothing and being like a hateful person, right? So, and so I would say that religions are similar. There's this book called God Is Not One by Stephen Prothero, who talks about, well, there's this idea that like, that everything goes to the same like source, right? And so Stephen Prothero is actually like pushing back on that and proposes like a pluralistic model to say like, hey, it's actually like not right for all of these like white Christians to say that like other organized religions, particularly who are mostly like black and brown members of the tradition, right? To say that like, hey, it's just the same God, it's just like a different way. And so Stephen Prothero is really pushing back on like that justice aspect of it. And so I would say like that is sort of how I would categorize religion, right? Is this idea of like there's a problem, there's a way to solve it, or there's a solution that is aimed for, right? And then there are also like exemplars. And so in Christianity, the exemplars would be like saints or like biblical figures or like big name theologians. So, but with spirituality and mediumship, that seems to be more of like an organic thing. Like it seems to happen to people organically separate from religion. But it is also a religion, especially in the UK. Spiritualism is like its own sort of like thing, right? And they're organized in a way that is like the Spiritualist National Union or something like that. So, but I would say that it does seem to be separate in some ways, and in some ways it's also can be categorized in the same. Like in some ways it's a religion, and in some ways it's not, right?
Right. I think, yeah, and I think you're right. I think that, you know, especially like SMU, what you were just describing, when I take their lectures, so I also take courses with them, I take their lectures, and I'm actually considering to try to take some trans work in there too. But yeah, I feel that they still talk about God and they still talk about the connected, but it's more about the connectedness with source and the connectedness with all that's around us. And it's not just people, but or spirit. It's also like the trees, and it's also just like the elements in the earth and the water. And so that's just something that I just think is just really beautiful, because for those who are trying to embark on more of a spiritual journey, a spiritual path, it's not. I can understand why religion can seem very scary for people, or even moving away from religion can seem scary, because it's almost like information that was fed to you that that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, that it's bad, or if you're not following these specific set of rules, it's bad. And then things are a little bit conflicting in the Bible when they, again, like we were talking about earlier, when they talk about mediumship and not, you know, seeking that out and all that. But at the end of the day, how I look at it is are we here to spread light and love to the world? Are we here to help others connect so that they can understand there's more beyond the five physical senses? And every time there's a connection made, it's just pure love. It's like unconditional, undiluted love that one feels when you're actually connecting with a guide or an angel or helper or a loved one on the other side. So that's just really interesting. Thank you for that, for your viewpoint. What would you say to those who, because right now you obviously being a minister, being a preacher, being an activist, and now being on as drag, a lot of people will look at that and be like, what is this? Like, what is going on? What's happening to the world? You know, those people that have those thoughts. So what would you say about that? Because you're obviously like the epiphany of everything. That's what most or people will think. You know, how can you be a drag queen and be a medium? How are you connecting to God and to these higher beings if you're a drag queen? So how do you go about that? How do you navigate that? And how does this help you or inspire you to continue moving forward to help others with your with your light, with your gift?
Like, I think a lot of people think of them as separate. And for me, there's never been a disconnect. These are just like different facets of who I am. And I think that, especially in like a church or a ministerial context, showing up as your full authentic self is very powerful, especially when the message has been not to do that, right? To hide who you are, specifically for like the LGBTQIA plus community. And so drag preaching, I think, is like very, very powerful because not only is like affirming, but it's also queering the church. And so we think of like, what is the heart and soul of a congregation, of a local church, right? And for me, I would say that that's your Sunday worship. And there's this movement to queer the church, but I think a lot of people get stuck in doing like extra things outside of worship, where it's sort of like, it's kind of like, oh, well, we're gonna like be affirming, but we're going to not do anything in our worship service to be affirming, but we're gonna have this like queer theology Bible study, right? That's like that's like how I started out doing queer theology a little bit in the church. And so like I had talked about that like with my supervisors and with the other ministers on staff, and I was like, listen, like if you want to really queer the church and if you want to really make this an affirming space that's like open and accepting to all people, you need to do it in worship. You can't just have your extracurriculars be that.
Right. Exactly. Almost like it's hiding, like
Right.
they were hiding it, or
And
only
so,
certain people
like,
can come, but not everyone watching
drag.
it and seeing it. Right.
And as far as like mediumship, like I don't really bring that to my ministerial context, but like I would say that like there are people in the church who are concerned with mediumship and concerned in like a way that is not like, oh, I'm concerned about it. Like that's kind of like, ooh, it's me. Concerned in a way that is like, I know about this thing and I've had experiences, and like I'm able to relate to that in a way. And so I feel like because I've had similar experiences, I can better minister to that group of people. And I've worked in 2 churches so far in my career, and in both of the churches, they're quite different culturally. And in both of the churches, there ended up being like clusters of people who talk about like, oh, like so-and-so has the gift, or so-and-so is a medium, and sort of like gathering together and talking about those things separate from, you know, what goes on in like the day-to-day to church, which I think is really interesting. And I also think that there's just a history of like folk tradition, especially among Protestants. So I'm a Protestant. I'm part of the United Church of Christ. And I would say like, you know, I'm not citing my sources here, so maybe you don't fully trust me on this one, but like I'm thinking back to reading these like essays about like when people thought that like vampires were real and that like witches were real, and they would have like these folk traditions where they would like put the body upside down or put a stake through the heart or something like that. But they're still Christians, right? They're still part of a Christian tradition, but they have this like folk aspect or like a divination or like a spiritual aspect to their faith journey, which I think is really astounding and is it's what we see, right? It's what I have seen as a minister in the church of today, is that the church isn't necessarily meeting the need of like of being able to explain mystical experiences, right? Or to even have a stance on them. It's just sort of like, oh, we don't talk about that. Well, why not talk about it?
Exactly. Because that's really, when we think of mystical, again, with the wording, there's so many different words that are thrown in the Bible, but really to me, it's like an interpretation, like mystical. It's like when you receive a visitation or you have a dream and clairvoyantly a message comes to you, or you're just doing a mundane task and then you hear a voice in your head, like guiding you or telling you something. So, I just think that, again, there's a lot of people out there that might feel afraid, or they might feel, oh, I grew up very religious, so I feel like there is something in me that's beginning to stir, waking up, but I'm not gonna go there because I think it's bad, or I was told it's bad, or my family doesn't approve. So I have a lot of people coming to me to tell me those things. And yet when they come into my healing space and they receive a healing, they want more and more because they're receiving these messages from their loved ones, and it's like, oh my gosh, and it's almost like a realization. So again, I just think that this is really beautiful that you work in such a capacity where you're literally weaving all of these things, and you're really just, showing people how it doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter what you believe, it doesn't matter, but this is about spreading your light to the world and being very inclusive to everyone that feels different, or everyone that associates with some sort of different gender or different whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is that I just think it's a beautiful thing that you're doing. And so again, this is just like super amazing. So what would you say that for those that are being a little bit like turned off, and that they're actually wanting to go away from the church, and they want to go away and they want to develop, let's say, a psychic ability, or they want to know more about mediumship, or they want to just develop themselves in a more spiritual way? Is there any advice or any recommendations, especially someone who's been through many different challenges or different aspects? Like, what would you say to that? Like, if someone who's definitely willing to leave the church, or they want to go into spirituality and develop mediumship, is that something that you would recommend? Did you do anything specific to develop, or to kind of like pave the way to your own path?
I mean,
like,
as
what
far
was that
as
for
advice,
you?
like, if you're feeling called to something, that means you sort of have this like inner knowing, right? And if you have that inner knowing, there's also sort of this like spiritual, like God, like approval to that, I would say, in many cases, right? Where you're sort of like, oh, I feel called to like to do this thing, right? Like I feel like God is calling me to do X, Y, Z. And so if God is calling you to like go be a psychic, then go be a psychic. Like it doesn't have to be like, and you don't even have to leave the church either. Like I feel like I did it. you know.
But not everyone is March. Not everyone is March. And so these are facts, right? So there are people that have this internal dialogue, but there is that fear, and we know how fear can be debilitating. Fear is just like your ego on like steroids, like telling you and keeping people stuck, keeping people in the same routine, the same pattern, and they can't get out of it. So, is there any so yeah, you're right, it's like go and do it, but what do you think, if there was any advice that you could give to those people, let's say in those people who associate with being a drag queen or being gay or being whatever title? The point is what would you recommend or say to those people who are actually looking outward, outside of what they've learned, outside of the Bible, outside of religion? What would you say to those people?
The church is going to disappoint you, even if you're in the most accepting church. It's not unreasonable to go outside of a tradition and seek in search of like your own spiritual truth, right? Like, to me, it makes sense that, and there was a study that came out that said that non-binary people are actually more likely to engage in divination if they're if they identify as like religious or spiritual. And it's not even like, 20% or something like that. It's actually more than 50%. I want to say it's like 70 or 80% of non-binaries,
Wow.
religious people engage in like some form of divination. And like that's really fascinating, and I think really speaks volumes to like how just like LGBTQIA plus people have responded to like the church, because even though like the church is like hateful, that doesn't mean that like we're not spiritual and religious people. And so for the church to be like rejecting us, it makes perfect
Right.
sense for someone to go out and like search for, some other like form of spirituality or some other like religion that they feel called to. And so for me, like that's one of the ways that like I started getting involved in like doing tarot readings, right? Like I was not feeling the church. I was really not feeling the church. And like I think a lot of like spiritual, like witchcraft, like aspects are accessible, right? Like you can go to like a new age store, like witchy store, and you can buy tarot cards and you can start using them like on the same day, right? Whereas like with church, it's just sort of like, well, I feel like there's a lot of like gatekeeping with like what is and what is not valid spirituality. And so with sort of stuff like mediumship and like other sorts of divination, it seems to be like this, like people go to that because first of all, they're more accepting than Christians, just the way it is, right? And it's there, right? And people have like open arms and they're like ready to welcome you into those spaces. And
It's non-judgment. It's really a non-judgment space, and I think that's what's really calling people and really like trying to, and people waking up and feeling drawn to, it's really the energy. Again, I work like a lot with energy, and I feel like when you go into, and don't get me wrong, because for example, I want to give an example. I recently came back from a trip to my one of my gem shows in Tucson, and so one of my experiences, so I'll go back a little bit even further. So as a child, whenever I used to sleep over one of my cousins' house, they were very religious. And so my family, like my mother, my father, we never went to church, but there were lots of people in the family that were very connected to the church. And so whenever the cousins would like stay together, that family, my cousins, they were like super into church, going to church every Sunday. And so when I would stay over the weekends, they would bring me to Sunday school. And so that's when I learned about the Bible, and that's when we read the Bible. And I was all about it because even at that time, I was hearing and seeing angels and seeing spirit and getting visitations that young. I think I started going to church maybe at like 7 or 8, but I was receiving information even younger than that. So I felt like a resonance. But then there was a situation where a new family wanted to be a part of the church, and I heard everyone welcoming them very lovingly and saying, "Oh my gosh, welcome to the church. Thank you for being here. Go ahead, there's food on the table. Go eat." And then all of a sudden that family leaves, and I hear the same people talking behind their back. And I'm a little girl, I'm like right there hearing, and they're like, "Oh, but I heard that they have AIDS, and I hear this, and I hear that, I can't believe this, and I don't know how that happened." And I remember being traumatized. I remember thinking, well, what happened to my brother and sister then? What happened to, the love and the non-judgment? And so honestly, that started turning me off about the church. And this was like super early on before I could even really understand like what was going on with me or what was happening around me. But then fast forward, and I recently had a trip. And so the irony of it is all these years, I'm still able to, hear and connect. But then I go on my trip to my gem show, and one day I wake up and I just receive a really strong message, a really strong, clear sensing feeling that I need to go seek out a church there. So I start Googling, and then I find this missionary that was established there. It was one of the first missionaries in Arizona. It might be even in the world, the oldest missionary there. And I went there and I took a detour for the year, for that day to go there. And a lot of the locals I had asked questions about this because this is literally in the middle of the desert and I was traveling alone. So in my head, I was like, if I'm going to the middle of the desert, like I better, I better do like my homework. And so long story short, I did ask like the Uber drivers, like, tell me a little bit about this. What is your opinion? And so a lot of them had mixed opinions. Some people said that the missionary was really established because they were trying to really hone in on Christianity and all of the indigenous peoples of that place. They wanted to convert, but it was more for an ego purpose. But when I was there, what I felt was nothing but love, the energy of love. It was pure love. I was walking on sacred ground. I was walking past a cemetery. I went up to this mountain with like a cross on the top. I saw Mother Mary there in the statue, like she was like embedded in the rock of this cliff. And I just felt this deep connection of peace, almost as if I've always had a connection to the church in one way, shape, or form. So it's just interesting for me because even though I don't consider myself religious, there is a lot about religion that I resonate with. I mean, I speak to angels. That's a form of religion, to believe in angels, right? So what would you say to someone who's like having those types of experiences where it's almost like a conflict or a contradiction, like, oh, you're not supposed to like the church because the church is scary or the church is saying this, but at the same time there's like a part of you, your soul calling, that's like, oh my gosh, this feels right, it just feels peaceful. So have you experienced that,
Kind
those
of.
moments like on your
But
journey?
also just like all of these rules are just like made up. All of these boundaries between like, oh
Yeah.
well, if you're a Christian then you can't do this, you can't do that, da, 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 da. Like that's all made up. Like Christianity is like very much like made up. And like I will say this as like a progressive Christian, I think that Christianity is just like subjective. Like it's a subjective understanding of the world. Um, and until you really get into that, if you're sort of stuck in like religionist fact, you're gonna be stuck there, right? And so one thing is to understand how everything is like open to interpretation, everything is subjective, and like these rules like are just made up, and so like you don't need to follow them. And to think that like, oh well, like this is just like a separate thing, and like Christians, oh don't go there, Christians. Well, why not? And also like I would say like as someone who does mediumship and is also a minister, like you don't have to choose either or, you could do both. And it's you could do one for a while and then go back to it, and you might not plan to. You could just be like, fuck the church. Like I said fuck the church so many times. I basically said fuck the church in my sermon on Sunday. So like,
Yeah, I know. You're like, how with this?
yeah,
I don't
like
have
it's a
time for this,
journey,
but peace
and so
out.
like just be
Have a
open to
nice
the
life.
journey and like where's spirit calling you to go. Like, okay, so like this is like kind of funny, and like the 5 people watching this are probably gonna laugh, but like as a minister, like I don't really pray that much.
Everyone's
Like
like
I don't really
jumping in and
spend
out.
time
Yeah.
sitting down and like talking to God. Like I'm more of like a mystical minded person where I'm just like, okay, where is God speaking right now? Like how is God speaking right now? Where is God calling me to go right now? And having that sort of like awareness, I find has like sort of filled what a lot of people would think of as like, you have this like cut and dry, like uh, this like start to finish, like this is where you talk to God is in prayer. And like that's
Rules
just
or
not how it is for me, and it's not how it is for a lot of
right.
people. I'm just living my life in this like continuous awareness that like spirit is around me, that God is around me, that like my departed loved ones are around me, you know what I mean? And so like, do I really feel like I need to like sit down and be like, oh God, I hope you're listening? Like, no.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I do. I see what you're saying, and I just think that it's beautiful for it to be coming from you, so that other people can say and see, like, oh my gosh, this is coming from like a minister. This person works in a church. This person is a drag queen. This person is a medium, and is still living your life and what feels right for you. And so that is, to me, being your true authentic self. So that's the message, and that's, that's just something that's just so beautiful. And again, thank you for that. So can you talk a little bit more about your mediumship? So you specifically, how have you been developing your mediumship? Do you find yourself more clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient? And for those of you who don't know, I'll have you kind of like explain what they are. But do you consider yourself any of those, all of those? Are there any clairs that are your favorites? Are there any clairs that you still want to hone in on? So what would you talk about in terms of your specific mediumship? And what's your strongest clair?
It's not so
and
much
what are you
that like
resonating
I'm
towards?
one more than the other. It's more so with how is a spirit communicator communicating with me right now? Do you know what I mean? And so, like, one spirit communicator may rely more on clairvoyance, they may rely more on clairaudience, or, like, they just might do, like, clairsentience. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, I don't really, like, go into a reading being like, we're doing clairvoyance today. You know what I mean? To me, it's just like, all right, who's here? What do we got? What are you saying to me? And just sort of like, right.
Yes. And how do you feel that? Yes. How do you feel into that information? Yeah. It's like a weaving of all of it. Yeah. Some people actually, though, a lot of people, they say, which I find a little bit confusing, because they say, oh, I can only hear. Like, I can only hear, like, I can't see, and I can't. And for me, I think that's a little bit hard to understand, because, again, just like as you said, when you're making that contact, it's like you're open or you're not, right? Does that make sense? It's like, are you here? Are you in your power? Are you connecting? Are you blending or not? So I can, that is a little bit confusing, but I do understand that people early on, I guess, in their development, might just be blocking themselves, because they're just like, oh, I am not a strong clairvoyant, or I'm hard to see images in my head, or I'm not a really good creative person, or I can't do imaginary, I never dream, so there are people that I hear of that. But I honestly feel that mediumship is something anyone can develop, but I also do strongly believe that the best or the strongest mediums are mediums that were naturally born
that seems
What
to
is your
be
opinion on that?
the trend, right? Like, I remember, like, Trace Capito talking about her early childhood experiences. And so the way that you know if you're a natural born medium, right, is if you've had experiences with spirit when you're younger, right? Is that how you define it too? Yeah. So
Yes, yes. Because at that point you're so open, but you don't know what's going on.
Right.
It's just happening. So it's almost like the ego's not there, and
Yeah.
it's just naturally occurring. So what were you
I
saying about your story?
Oh yeah, like,
I'm sorry, I had cut you off
like,
there.
I guess so. Like, when I think
Teresa,
of, like, okay,
no,
who are the most
that's a
successful mediums, like the ones that are on TV, and they usually have like some sort of story, being like, when I was a kid, I saw a man, and the man was always in my house, and the man wasn't real, and the man was a spirit. Like, surprise, it's this very like consistent story, or like a consistent sort of narrative, right? To be like, oh, well, then you're a natural born medium. And yeah, like, I would say that, like, natural born mediums are probably like more likely to explore developing, right? Because if you don't have experience, like a spontaneous experience like that, you might not explore it ever. You might not be called to. But I'm like open to being surprised.
right.
Like, I really want someone to surprise me and be like, I didn't have any of these experiences, but I'm still into mediumship, and like, I'm one of the world's best mediums now. Like, I would love to see that.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Oh,
I
hi,
hear you.
Mom.
It's funny because my mom joined, saying hi to my mom. Hi, mommy. Yeah, she was like super excited to be a part of this today. So thank you for being here, Mom. Okay, so another thing. So do you believe that the work of being a light worker, or the work of being a psychic, or work of being a medium, or the work that you do you believe that this comes from God? What do you think is the purpose? What is the purpose, your interpretation or your ideas of what is the purpose of those that are believed to be mediums or psychics, or believed to be a light worker, have gifts to share with the world? Where is that coming from? Is that, or the purpose of that? You've been, with the religious background, and very, very well versed in the Bible. What is your
Yeah.
opinion about that?
Sorry, can you say that again? It cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I know. It's feeling a little choppy today. So, what would you say is, for those of us who consider ourselves light workers or mediums, or people that go beyond the five senses, and they can help other people either energetically or spiritually? Do you believe that comes from God? Where do you think that the purpose, or these gifts or abilities that we have, where is that coming from? And why do you think we have it? What is your opinion about those of us who are put here on this earth that believe that they're here to help
Yeah, I
the
mean, there are
planet, to
lots of
help
different ways of
people?
thinking about it.
What's your opinion
And,
about that?
I mean, there's that scripture in Romans, and I think it's also in either in First or Second Corinthians, that says, like, there are many gifts of the Spirit, and, like, one of them is prophecy. It says it right there. And so, to me, like, yeah, I think it is from God or from Spirit or whatever.
And is the purpose, and what do you think that purpose is for those of us who are being called to help on a deeper level, on a spiritual level?
Yeah.
What do you think that purpose is? Like, if for those people who are not sure, like they feel like, oh, I'm hearing spirit, or I'm seeing spirit, or I'm having these vivid dreams, and I think it's spirit, I think it's an angel, I think it's my aunt or my guide on the other side. um what would you tell someone
Yeah,
who's still like on the cusp of not fully knowing or believing, whether they are, whether they're not, and what should they do with that?
To me, mediumship is it's providing evidence that life continues, and that the purest form of life is love, right? Because when spirit comes through, they're always going to be sending you a message of love. And that is what I've experienced in my mediumship readings, and what I know a lot of other mediums who are trained similar to me have experienced, is that there's just this consistent message of love. Now, psychic, I think, is another story. Because I sort of think that, like, in terms of psychic, it just sort of seems like a power that exists. You know what I mean? And I think,
It's reading
yeah.
energy. So psychic to me is just reading the energy of the person. And it's funny because I am also a very strong psychic. My mom, who's on, she is a super, super strong psychic. And I even explaining to my mom, because she is a medium as well, but explaining to her, because she's old school. So she's very like old school, medium, spiritual. So it's like she's not into like going to
Awesome.
classes
Yeah.
and doing all that stuff, because it's just natural for her. Do you know what I mean? So I'm explaining to her, like, okay, this is what I did in class, and this is what I've learned. And it's just so interesting for her, because this is something that just comes so naturally. Do you know what I mean? So it's just like a different school of thought, so to speak.
Well, it's like,
So going back to
kind
the
of
psychic, what were
like,
you gonna say?
what you do with it. It's kind of like water bending. Are you familiar with the Avatar series? Well, and so, like, the Avatar
Water
universe, there's,
bending?
you can bend all of the elements, right? But
Oh
so
yeah,
in water
my
bending,
son watches
there's
that. It's
this,
like a
like,
cartoon thing,
forbidden
right?
sort of water bending technique called blood bending, right? So, like, on the full moon, there are these, like, select few water benders who can, like, bend the blood within like living creatures, including humans. And like that's kind of how I understand like psychic, is that the power is there and the power exists, and you can use it for good, and you can also use it for bad. You know, you could use it for some reasons that are probably not for the good of all things.
So yeah, right. Yeah, and I see that. I feel like there's a lot of people that are out there that, consider themselves, psychic and tarot, and the things that they're doing, it's just like witchcrafty, but not in a good, it's not good. The messages they're saying is really more based off of fear. I think it's more fear based. I
Yeah,
believe that when one is working mediumistically, it's more love. It's love. It's pure love, because you're not getting the messages from your head, from you. You're actually getting it from source, and source is pure love, pure loving energy. So yes, I definitely agree with you there. There is a difference between psychic and medium. And also,
yes,
psychic is also up to interpretation. It's your interpretation. Does that make sense? Like when you're receiving psychically, it's like you're the one that's weaving the picture and trying to make sense of it, versus when you're receiving mediumistically, and it's the source that's coming to you
right.
with the facts, with truth, with wisdom. This is all great. So is there, so just to wrap up a little bit, because I know we're hitting time, but so why is it important? Because I know that you deliver your messages when you go to church, and you're in drag, right? So how is that important? Why is that important for you? Why did you decide to blend the two, drag with doing your sermons and being on church? And how is that important to you and to the development of you, of who you are, and how can that like help others that are also
Well, I think it's like
relating or
ultimately a
resonating to
spiritually
being a
healing
drag queen?
experience for myself and for other people to, walk into church and to see a drag queen at the pulpit, like giving the message. And that speaks.
It's so powerful. It's so powerful. Like watching you on Sunday on YouTube, and everyone, you should definitely watch that. I'm gonna send the link. I'm actually gonna write out the link. But if you also follow her, and I have her IG information, Theology Queen, right? Theology.queen on Instagram. You can see her on YouTube, because it's just fascinating. It's amazing, and it's just so powerful. So go ahead. I didn't mean
Yeah,
to
I
cut
mean,
you
I
off, but it was
think
such a beautiful, beautiful
there are a
experience
lot
on
of things that
Sunday.
go on there, right? And like I'm still uncovering everything that is like what it means to be, doing what I call drag church, right? Um, but one of the things that I think it does is that it points to the rules of church, right? It points to how you're supposed to, like, when you go to church, you're supposed to look a certain way, you're supposed to act a certain way, you're supposed to be a certain way. And drag says, fuck all those rules, and we're making our own rules. And that's really, I feel like those like
That's
rules of
right.
the church get in the way, or they can get in the way of God. They can get in the way of the Spirit moving. So I mean, sometimes rules can help. Like sometimes, if you have like a ritual, if you do it in
Right.
like a specific way, fantastic. Like that could work too. But the rules of church are not helpful, especially when they're based on exclusion, judgment, things like that. So it's dismantling all of those things. It's like this declaration that queer and trans people are beloved by God or the divine or however. Um, and it's also just like fun.
Because it's a soul. Because it's a soul, right? It's like, it's not about the person, this physical form, but it's about the soul
Absolutely.
and the love of
Mhm.
the soul and the connection of soul to soul, right? So that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. So that's why I just really, just having you on is just amazing, because someone might look at this and say, how can this person be a medium? How can this person be a minister or work in a church, and they're a drag? Because people are still thinking these outdated thoughts or these patriarchal ideas of, you're not supposed to be the X, Y, and Z, but really the message of spirit and the message of God or the message of universe is that internal love, that love for all that's around you. It's that non-judgment. And so I just think that's just so beautiful. So do you have, before we go, do you have anything that that you'd like to add or say? I know you do some activist work. Do you want to, talk about that a little bit, so that way for those of us that are here watching, they can find out more about it if they're interested in helping out in any way? Would you like to
I
talk
would
about
just plug
anything
in
or any last minute thoughts or ideas?
a mutual aid project that I'm working on right now at work. It's called the Fort Fridge. You can find us on Instagram. And we are a community fridge in the neighborhood of Washington Heights on 181st and Fort Washington Avenue. And it was born out of a mutual aid, the spirit of mutual aid when COVID hit New York City. And, I would just encourage us to really not let mutual aid be something of the past. To be compassionate to your neighbor, to love your neighbor. And, we are experiencing this life together, and so we need each other. Like, I fully believe that, like, we're not meant to go through this life alone, and we're supposed to be there for each other. And that is, like, the root of my activism.
No, that's so beautiful.
Amen.
That is so beautiful. Literally, like, tear. Can I get an amen? That's awesome. So, so for all of you watching, I just want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. This has just been amazing. I'm so honored that Marge Erin Johnson was here with us today. You can find her at theology.queen. And she has this wonderful book, which I don't want to forget about. Can you just quickly talk to us about the book that you helped edit and what the book is? Because I definitely want a copy of that book, and definitely want it in my shop.
My book is called Beyond Worship, Meditations
can you tell us a little bit
Queer
more about
Worship,
that?
Liturgy, and Theology. It's an anthology that's organized like a worship service, and it has contributions from 33 LGBTQIA plus and Two-Spirit authors. And it's a resource. So it could be, if you're a religious leader, you could use it in that way. If you're, looking for academic religious study, it's good for that. If you're looking for personal devotion, it's good for that. If you're looking to, be a better ally to the queer trans communities, it's perfect for that. Most of the authors are trans or non-binary, which I think is really fantastic and something that, I need to be saying more. It's a really wonderful collection of pieces. It's a very diverse collection of pieces. And so the premise of the book was really anything that you could share in a worship service. And so the book is organized like a worship service, where it has call and response type of things, poems. It has like sermons and essays. It has rituals and responses. And it also, the last section is benedictions and blessings. So definitely check it out. It's a great resource.
Yes. Yay. Well, thank you so much. I will definitely check it out. I definitely want to have that in the shop. I will definitely plug that also on Instagram. So for everyone watching, you've heard it here. Marge Erin Johnson, thank you so much for visiting us and joining us and talking about your experiences and just your ideas on all things spiritual and your life experiences. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And again, you can find her at theology.queen. And if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to either DM me afterwards or go directly to Marge. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer any of your questions. If you want to copy the book, Amazon. I'm sure you can find it. Where can we find the book? Marge?
Really, like any
on
you probably won't find
Amazon. There you go. So
it's a little more of like a, whatever you call it, an underground kind of book. But you can find it online. You can Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com.
Yay. Super excited. Well, thank you so much, Margie. I look forward to seeing you soon. We're going to be working together real soon again. So thank you. Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Mwah.